morning. Morning, I'm Nicky Campbell. Welcome to The Big Questions. We're back at Manor, Church of England Academy in York to debate one very big question. Is it more rational to believe in God? Welcome, everyone, to The Big Questions this morning, and thank you very much for coming here. Now, Blaise Pascal, the 17th century French mathematician, physicist and inventor, became a Christian philosopher later in his life. He combined the mathematics of probability with religious belief in his famous wager, arguing that as you can neither prove nor disprove God's existence, you must wager. If God exists and you are a believer, you gain everything. If God does not exist, you lose nothing. So Pascal reasons that you should believe in God. So, would Pascal say the same today when the faithful are often publicly pilloried as idiots and science continues to discover rational explanations for the former mysteries of life? Is it more rational to believe in God? To debate that question, we've assembled a very distinguished lineup of philosophers, theologians, commentators, scientists, people of faith, and people who've lost faith. You can have your say via Twitter, online. Just log on to bbc.co.uk/thebigquestions, where you'll find links to continue the discussion there. There'll be lots of encouragement and contributions, of course, from our very lively York audience. Is it more rational to believe in God? So, Julian Baggini, welcome. Good morning.
Good morning.
Now, there are people who say it is far more rational to believe in God than not to, and they are, you will not be surprised to hear, sitting in this studio. So why do you think, what do you say to them?
Well, I mean, I think that you've got to look at what's rational. You've got to look at what the reasons give us reason to believe on balance. Now, that's why I don't think it's very helpful just to say that religious believers are irrational, so they're just stupid. There's a balance of evidence, and you've got to ask yourself, where does it lean most heavily? And I think that if you were to ask, well, what would happen if someone came into this debate without a prior knowledge, without an upbringing in one particular religion or another? And I think if they looked at the evidence, they would conclude that this is a natural universe without any supernatural guidance going on, and that the religions we have in this culture are a product of different cultures, which is why there are different religions in different societies. That's a very sort of like broad-brushed version of the argument, but it's that idea that it's just on balance. That's what seems to be where the reason points.
So that there's no natural inherent, well, needs the wrong word, but there is no God within us that means we have to believe in God or we're led to believe in God. You don't believe that?
There are, it seems to be natural instincts towards looking for like purpose and agency in the universe. So it seems to be a very natural human instinct to sort of try and find reasons for things happen, which are to do with motivations and desires. But the fact that that's something we've evolved to have doesn't actually tell us anything about whether or not there is something there actually doing that. You know, the instinct is just an instinct, which you could say evolved because we need to look to how things work. We need to understand how things work. And for other people, it's helpful to be able to see them as having motives. But that kind of general instinct, I think, when we apply it to the universe as a whole, it's misapplied because the universe isn't another person. It isn't something we need to understand the motivations of.
Okay, thank you. So that last point about how we've evolved to seek pattern and seek explanation, Professor McGrath, Science and Religion, Oxford University. We are brainy primates, aren't we? We are pattern-seeking mammals. That's what Julian is saying. Of course, we seek for an explanation. We seek an explanation, and also we seek a comfort zone. Do we not?
Well, of course we're looking for explanations. I mean, that's what intelligent people do. It's about trying to work out what is going on in the world. And Julian is also right to say, look, you know, that's just part of who we are. But that doesn't deny the validity of looking for meaning. And explaining why we think something does not invalidate the quest. What I want to say is, look, I'm a scientist. I began as an atheist. I became a Christian. And for me, one of the enormously exciting things about discovering the Christian faith was not simply it helped me be a better scientist, but also it really opened up this question of meaning. I think many of us here today are watching this program precisely because this question of meaning really matters. And, you know, meaning isn't something you can read off from just looking at the universe. It's about deep reflection. Maybe it's about thinking about the deepest instincts within us.
Was your life lacking in meaning before when you were an atheist?
I think I felt I had meaning, but I felt also it was a meaning I had simply constructed. And the deeper question for me was, is there something there I'm meant to be walking into? Is there something there, a bigger picture of which I could be part? And that seemed to me to be a very important question to ask.
A lot of people point, and we'll come on to this, of course, a lot of people point to certain precepts of religion and they see them as being irrational. I mean, and some people say, how can it be rational to take your religion to accept that we are born sinful, and unless we get better, we're threatened with a hell that the God who made us created? Now, you can see how some people think that is baloney.
Well, I can see why some people would say that, but with respect, I don't think that. And I mean,
many of your faith do.
Exactly, but I think one of the points I'd like to make is that you've got to respect the fact that, for example, a religion like Christianity is a very rich religion. There are different perspectives, and it's very easy to say there's this kind of Christianity. I think it's baloney. Let's get this guy to own up to it. No, I want to say that Christianity is rich, exciting, enormously intellectually stimulating. Maybe there are forms of it that aren't. That's not me.
It's a broad church.
It's a broad church. And I belong to a bit that I think is great.
Yeah, Julian, do you want to come back?
Well, I think that is interesting, and Alistair's exactly right, that there are different forms of religion. And so anyone who tries to say that religion is irrational because of X, you're never going to cover all of it. But I do think that sometimes the problem here is that we can have this debate in these very sort of polite ways, and we can talk about how, of course, you don't have to believe in hell and so forth. But when it comes down to it, I do think, as a matter of fact, it is true that the majority of religious people will believe at least one thing, which to an atheist or to someone who would take a purely scientific view is kind of outrageous. So in terms of Christianity, for example, bottom line for a lot of people is the resurrection, that they may doubt certain things happened in the Old Testament and this, that and the other, but I've yet to find very few Christians I meet were prepared to say that no, that tomb wasn't empty because there was a resurrection of Christ. Now that's a very tough thing to believe if you accept a naturalistic sort of scientific worldview, but people do believe it. I'm not saying they shouldn't, but in doing so they are going against, I think, a scientific worldview in that particular point.
I'll come back in a minute. Vince, you want to come in here? You're on the edge of your seat.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Julian, and I think sometimes there's an assumption that Christianity or belief in God generally is the more extraordinary belief. It's the more miraculous belief, and therefore it has the burden of proof. And I thought that for a long time, and the more I reasoned about it, and I thought, what are the possible big picture explanations for the universe? There are only three primary ones. One might be God made it, and I might just put my hand up and say that's pretty extraordinary, that's remarkable. But if I look at the other two, the universe just popped into existence from nothing with no explanation whatsoever. Okay, that's a very odd option as well. Physical stuff usually doesn't pop in and out of existence. If it doesn't now, why would it have then? Or we say the universe has just existed infinitely, stretching back in time. And that, I think, just pushes the oddness one step back.
Or universes. Or universes. That's
exactly.
Number 4.
If it's universe or universes, either way that you understand that. Yeah. If there's a succession going back infinitely in time, still with no explanation for why that's the case. So I come to the conclusion that we live in a miraculous world, whether you're an atheist, a theist, or an agnostic. I don't think there's any getting around that fact. And once I came to see that, then I think I was more open to seeing that maybe miracles could take place.
But Julian, it's impossible for us to conceptualize that stuff. 13.5 billion years. It's no more likely that we're going to do it than a rat is going to explain what the London Underground is all about,
Well, that's exactly right here, is that whatever the truth is, it is extraordinary, and it is extraordinarily hard to fathom. But I don't think anyone should think that the solution they come up with, whether they're theist or atheist, is that the final account. Of course isn't. For the religious, there are very deep mysteries which they don't understand. Similarly, there are very deep mysteries for the more, say, scientifically inclined people. But again, it goes back to
many religious people are very scientifically inclined.
Some of them are. That's true. A lot of them are.
Some of them are. A lot of them are.
Thank you, Julian. That's the real world. That's the real world.
So it's a question of which fits which extraordinary explanation the most, and that's where I think the rationality points to the naturalistic one.
We'll come to the science later on, because there are some fascinating areas within science for us to discuss. But what about and you touched on this, Julian, the cultural reasons. Different religions in different parts of the world, different cultural histories, different anthropological bases for those. And Dr. Lois Lee, this is quite interesting. Recent studies have shown that societies with a stronger belief in heaven and hell have higher crime rates. Now, this is multifactorial, as they say. But societies with a strong welfare state, a big comfort blanket, lots of security for those who live within, have a lower religious belief. What can we extrapolate, if anything? And my goodness me, it's very complicated.
It is very complicated. Definitely multi-factored, but I think that it gets to, you said, if we leave our religious backgrounds at the door, then we can work with evidence. And that's a really big if. We can't leave our backgrounds at the door. And for most people, what we find is you are religious or you're non-religious according to the norm in your locale. It can be as local as the borough you live in, can be as local as your family, but it also works on the national level. So when we're thinking about rationality and weighing up the evidence and so on, we're putting to one side a big part of the picture, which is this cultural inclination towards one belief or another. And as you said, there's many factors for that. The size of the welfare state is a major factor. The larger the welfare state, the less likely you are to be religious.
The religious history of a country as well, does that come into play if a country is formally very religious?
Yeah, so you can't, what we can find is a general trend line that the larger the welfare state and how relatively affluent it is can allow us to predict how religious it is or how atheist it is. But then we find that we get pushed in different directions by cultural backgrounds. So state atheism had a big impact, and we saw a big rise in atheism within that cultural context. So we have to consider those cultural factors as well, and not say, because there's a big welfare state, therefore I can say that religion is all about comfort and so on. There isn't going to be any easy explanations like that. But certainly we need to take those into account.
What about Sweden? That's famously cited as an example of quite an atheistic or agnostic or not very religious place. Are they irrational?
The thing is, if you do
or are they
focus,
very rational? I mean, it depends which side of the debate you're on.
It's a good question, because if you do focus exclusively on rationality and these kinds of debates, you end up having to say the Swedish are more rational than the Brits, which you may want to say.
Yeah.
We're 13th highest in terms of the amount of atheism that's from a shorter list of.
So we're either the 13th
countries.
most rational or the 13th most irrational.
So we have to accept as a country that we're less rational than the French, the Latvians, the Estonians, and so on, and more rational than 27 other countries.
It's like the Eurovision Song Contest. We're never going to win anything, you know. So is there a tipping point perhaps where it becomes, you know, lots of people are saying at the moment they're feeling it's becoming unacceptable to express your religious beliefs, express your Christianity. Is there a tipping point in some countries whereby it becomes socially more acceptable and expected that you are not a believer? And so that's self-perpetuating in a sense.
No, absolutely, and that's the creation of a new culture in which it's normal to be X or Y. And that's also really important in terms of rational claims, because if people make a rational claim, what you want to see is that they back that up by their action and so on. So you see the kind of transformation of rationality is very informed by these different kind of cultural norms. I think Britain is quite an interesting country because there's quite actually a balance between religious cultures, Christian culture especially, and atheist and non-religious cultures. They're the two, they're sort of both sitting at the 40-50%. So actually it's quite an interesting space for discussion. And the discussion matters because that's what creates the cultures. So the cultures then condition what we're able to think through and take on, and our conversation participates in that. So it's not saying we don't have a very deterministic view and there's no point even having the conversation. But certainly, especially if we get to the stage of saying, so-and-so's being irrational, I think we have to accept that we're all pretty irrational. Accept that as a starting point.
Well, I do this show a lot. That would seem to be. But Professor McGrath, you're a great scientist. Whether that's nothing to do with your religion, you're a great scientist, great academic, highly respected. You know, you're an evolutionary theist. You accept that. You said that Adam and Eve are symbolic, and we'll come on to the science later on. And I'm sure, and you've already hinted at this, you can understand very well how some people point of aspects of religion and aspects of belief and think that is, if you pardon the expression, bonkers. You can understand that. But then the other accusation to you would be that you've moulded religion to fit into your rationality, and that's all you've done.